Good morning. It's unusual for a number of British people to be stood in front of some Europeans without talking about Brexit. But I'm going to talk about what I'm going to call Pexit. So it's how you can remove yourself from your passwords. So Ross and I are both ex-Citrix. And I guess the joy that we have in terms of going back into the Citrix community and seeing how the technologies have developed makes us give us that nice warm and cozy feeling inside. And certainly when I looked about joining Veridium, the key thing for me was the value that one of the strands of the business is able to add value back into the Citrix world. And certainly that was reflected in the recognition we got from the Citrix Signature event in terms of best in show, so we're getting that validation back in. So over the course of this presentation, what we want to be able to do is just get it fixed in your minds as to perhaps some of the challenges that you might be facing around the management of passwords and how we can alleviate some of that. And more importantly, give you some insight and some true experience of what Veridium can do from a user experience standpoint. So Ross will be doing demos, so fingers crossed the demo goes up with us. So no pressure on Ross, I don't know if you want to just introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I run the systems engineering team at Veridium, so my team are responsible for all pre and post-sales technical delivery with our customers. Like David said, I spent 3 years at Citrix, where I predominantly worked with the Zen Mobile and Netscaler products. So I've always been in and around the mobile security space. And my reason for joining Veridium was I had a fantastic time at Citrix, made some good friends. But ultimately my challenge has always been trying to give the customer that great balance between a fantastic user experience, but then also delivering to their security needs, whether that's driven by regulation or otherwise.
Fantastic. So in Derek's presentation, he was talking about how we can change the future state of the working environment for organisations and how we can deliver a far better experience. And if I look at that personal use and how I'm driven towards certain application types, I tend to think of my belly first. So we've got an application called Just Eat, which is a fast food delivery service. And prior to me discovering this application, I used to have numerous menus from different fast food sites, pick up the phone and order something. And when I discovered Just Eat and the simplicity of that user experience, and the single factor in it that drives me to use it is the payments. So how I conduct payments on Just Eat is with my thumb. They utilise Apple Pay, and so it's just completely frictionless. It has driven me to gain about 10 kilos in the past year, but that's a byproduct, that's my choice. And we think when we look at the type of applications and the way that we want organisations to be able to work, we're making some real fantastic changes in terms of the simplicity or the way that we're going to present application types. We looked at the presentation Derek's done around ensuring that performance of the network. But really, when we think about how we enter that environment, often we're going to be doing it in a way that is perhaps reflecting on something we might have done about 25 years ago. And that's typically with some kind of a username, password, and maybe a token that we don't really care about. And so if we think about how we enter that environment, well, it really matters from the start what the experience is like. If we want to drive adoption, if we want to ensure that organisations are really driving employee engagement, then it starts at the beginning. I'm sure we've all felt that frustration of entering a username and password to be told it's incorrect. I can't think of the number of times I've reset my Spotify password. And you do it over and over again, you go, this is the password, and then it fails. And you think, right, okay, I'll reset it. And you put in a new password. And it says, oh, you've already used this one. So, well, that was the one I was trying to get in this time. And we can see that experience coming into the workplace. And we know that when we drive a much better user experience and that engagement, when we have an engaged employee base, we can get a productivity increase of somewhere around about 20%. It's actually equivalent of getting people to work Saturdays without having to pay them. I think most organisations will kind of see the value in doing that. And so that's the kind of thing that we want to drive towards. And the way that we do this is by helping you to forget passwords forever. Because when we have passwords, users do a number of things. Well, they either want to make it really simple, in which case it's not that secure, or they make it exceptionally complex. And with it being complex, they can't remember it. And the average cost of a password reset is somewhere between 100 and 250 euros per individual a year. So there's a lot of cost implicit in that. And actually, what we want to be able to do is just remove that friction from the organisation. And kind of looking at this, well, that's 8 zeros. For 20 years, this was the password for the US missile defense system that allowed them to launch their nuclear threat within 1 minute. And the reason why they chose this is that it was easy to remember. So, incredibly, kind of important things hidden behind the most simple of passwords. And in fact, they had a program where, after they'd employed more complex passwords, another team swept behind and changed it to this. And part of the program, the first thing in that was check that the password is still 8 zeros. Now, within the context of the business, the cost of the average breach is around $3.9 million. And around 85% of cyber attacks are caused by weak passwords being cracked or passwords being reused. And we need to step away from this. So if we think about the drivers for wanting to change our security stance, we're trying to improve that user experience. Because if we give a great user experience, then we know that people will get on board with it. And today they don't have a great user experience when they get to that front door. We're seeing regulation coming in terms of, well, who is the user? Can I make sure that it's definitely that individual? And if there's some kind of breach to that, then there's going to be a fine. So we need to be able to ensure things like PSD2 are in line with that, and it's going to vary with various regulations depending on the particular sector that you're in, but there will be some there. And we need a more advanced protection for the new security threats that are coming through. We know that users are going to be everywhere. We've talked about this as a global organisation we're trying to build. So how do we know the user is that they say they are when they're not in the office? We don't have that protection anymore. And the world that we're used to isn't fit for purpose in this next phase. So by 2024, more than 50% of the workforce will be digital natives. So these are people born 1990s onwards. And their expectation is very different. They're not going to be satisfied with a more analog type experience. So we need to move at that pace. We know that the environment's going to be heterogeneous, the different types of applications coming through, whether that's SaaS-based, whether that's something from the cloud, something that's delivered on-premise. We need to be able to contend with all of those. And we know that things like one-time passcodes are expensive, so expensive to put in place. Password reset still happens in those environments, so that cost is just continuing and ongoing. And some of the ways of kind of getting around this, things like SMS, are just elementally hackable. It's very simple to intercept SMS. So what we're going to do is now give you an explanation as to how we can take away that pressure, give you a far greater user experience, and meet the needs of the organisation going forward.
Cool. Thank you, Dave. So I said in my introduction that in my time at Citrix, and firms at Citrix, I spent 7 years at Telefonica, or O2 as it's known in the UK. And my role was ultimately to deliver content to a mobile device in a secure way, right? And in a nutshell, that was the brief. The challenge that you then had was how do you secure that data once it's on a mobile device? How do you identify the user? So at Veridium, we believe that the challenge to that, or the response to that challenge, is to deliver single-step multi-factor authentication. So what does that mean? So what we believe is we take something that the user has, so you keep the possession factor, what you would have with a smart card or with a token, and then you use that as part of the authentication flow. So I can, if you want to come and talk about the tech in deep detail, come and talk to me afterwards. But in short, what we do is we generate a credentials, we store a certificate or a key, however you want to describe it, on the mobile phone, and that is always checked during the authentication process. So that's one factor, that's the possession, that's the mobile device. And of course, the one thing that we have to consider here is if you think about traditional authentication methods that use or that talk about possession, you think about smart cards, you think about tokens, users don't care about them. They're costly for the organisation to manage, to deploy, to purchase in the first place. Right? And fundamentally, the main thing is they deliver a poor user experience. Users don't look after them. So the possession factor for us is that smartphone, and we all know that that smartphone is our digital passport now, right? It goes everywhere with us. I think most people now, if you leave the house without your wallet, you might not go back to get it anymore, but you can guarantee if you left the house without your phone, you'd probably go home to pick it up again. So there's the possession factor. Then what else do we have? So then we believe that the best combination between security and user experience is the use of biometric authentication. So we have some technology that I'll go into in a second that takes the mobile phone and gives it a multitude of biometric authenticators. But talking about biometrics is actually nothing new. So biometrics has been around for a very long time, right? I mean, how long have we been flying in and out of airports, presenting, our fingerprints for identification? Is nothing new, right? But what has needed to change with biometrics is a couple of things. So first of all, accessibility, right? So how do you enable biometrics to your employees, to your customers, right? Hence the smartphone. How do you harness the smartphone? So that's the first challenge that we need to solve. The second challenge is the keys to the kingdom, the biometric template data, right? So if you have a database full of passwords today that your employees, that your customers may use, and that gets hacked, what do? You say, sorry, everyone changes their password, and then you move on. If you then got a database full of biometric data that contains pictures of faces and fingerprints, that's something as an organisation you just cannot recover from. And another concern that traditionally we had with biometrics was how do you address spoofability, right? So how do you solve the challenge around what if I can get a picture of your face, a picture of your fingerprints, how do you solve those challenges? So there's the three: accessibility, storage of the keys to the kingdom, the biometric templates, and then the spoofability element. So at Veridium, what we have is the Veridium ID platform. And with the Veridium ID platform, we aim to solve all of those challenges that I mentioned before. So I've talked a lot about the smartphone. So what do we actually have in that space? So what we have is we have a mobile SDK, which is manifested in the form of an app that you can download from the iTunes or the Google Play Store. And that SDK does a couple of things. So first of all, it allows you to consume native biometrics. So if your phone's got a native biometric sensor like a Touch ID, a Face ID, Samsung Fingerprint, you can use that as part of the authentication flow. And that's actually really important, we've found, in terms of adoption. So you can drive based on the type of application that you're accessing, which biometric you use, but we strongly advocate the use of native biometrics, at least at an entry point, at a low level, because it's that technology that your users, your employees, your customers already use in their personal lives, so they know how to use it. But then we're often asked, what happens if you don't trust the native biometric sensor? Or what happens if your smartphone doesn't have a native biometric? What do you do in that scenario? So we have our own proprietary biometric technologies. So we have a computer vision team that sit in Oxford in the UK, and what they've done is they've utilised the smartphone cameras, so the rear-facing camera for fingerprint recognition, and the front-facing camera for facial recognition. And then the idea behind that, like I say, we're dealing with all the use cases where your phone doesn't have a native biometric, or maybe where you don't trust the native biometric depending on the type of application you're trying to access, and you want to perform step-up authentication. And the other thing that we can do with the SDK is, I mentioned before that the phone's become that digital passport. It goes everywhere with you. It's probably the best representation of you that there is out there, certainly in technology terms. So what we can do is we can take attributes from the phone, things like operating system version, GPS location of the mobile device, and then we can incorporate that into authentication flows. And I'll touch a little bit more on that in the demonstration later. The Veridium ID platform, so the server infrastructure that I spoke about, so it's not a SaaS-based offering today, so we give you that technology, you go and deploy it in a location of your choosing, And then the Veridium ID platform has got two primary functions. So first of all, it acts as the gateway between the mobile devices and all of the applications that you might want to integrate it with. So we've got a series of connectors, things like SAML, Radius, OAuth, OpenID Connect, that allow seamless integrations with applications like NetScaler, like Storefront, Office 365. The list is potentially endless at that point. And then the other thing that the Veridium ID platform does is I spoke about the importance of protecting the biometric template data. Right? So if you capture someone's fingerprints, where do you store them? So we have some options that you can drive by policy, and you can dictate where you want to store the template. So you can opt to store them on the mobile device, and that makes a lot of sense if you need offline access to the template. But mobile device is always the highest surface area to attack, so you might opt to store them all on the server side. Now, if you store them on the server side, that makes sense if you need shared access to the templates too. So if you've got employees using different devices, think about a retail scenario where you're using different tablets every day, it makes sense to have a central biometric store. But then the concern there could be, well, actually, I then as an organisation hold all of the risk because I hold all of that biometric template data. So the third option, which is unique to us, is we can take that biometric template data and shard it, and we can store a proportion on the phone and another proportion on the server, the other half on the server. And then the idea is if either side is ever compromised, the biometric data is protected and safe, because without the other piece of the puzzle, you can't actually obtain that biometric template. And the last point I want to make around the biometric template data is we don't persist pictures of faces or fingerprints or anything as crude as that. It's basically a binary representation of some numbers that represent coordinates of minutiae and features on faces. Right? So it is secure by design, but for those customers that have concerns about storing in one place, we can distribute the template and store in different locations. So then to come to what's been particularly unique about our Citrix integration, I've got a customer example that I'll talk about in a little while as well. So as far as Citrix is concerned, we are the only fully passwordless vendor that has completed integration with Citrix. So what I mean by that is we can complete a passwordless login process, so using either SAML or using Radius through NetScaler or Storefront. Through integration with the federated authentication service, that gives you the sign in to your virtual apps and desktops. But the other thing that's unique to us is that we can actually deal with the unlock scenario. So if you've got a lot of virtual desktops and you've got some thin clients in your offices, when your users do Control-Alt-Delete and it locks the virtual desktop, if you've got rid of passwords, how do you unlock, right? Because the first thing that Microsoft credential provider is going to do is ask you for a password. So we've got some technology that allows integration with the federated authentication service to unlock a locked session, which is unique to us. And we were also the first vendor to complete an integration with Citrix Workspace and CloudFAS. So Oscar Day, who's one of the security product managers at Citrix, he did a session at Synergy where he presented the Veridium technology doing end-to-end passwordless authentication, yes, using biometrics at the front end. Citrix are also an investor in Veridium, so we have a very close tie with them, a corporate level, a commercial level, but then we also have some really close ties on a product level too. And there's some really exciting things that we have on the roadmap to deliver, which we can eventually share offline as well. So, one of the things I spoke about before was the concern around spoofability of biometrics. So with Veridium's own biometric technologies, where we use the camera to capture fingerprints and face, we've got inbuilt liveness detection capabilities, right? So things like if you manage to get a picture of someone's fingerprints, which is pretty difficult, you put that underneath the camera, we've got some capability there that's able to detect if it's a picture, if it's a real hand. But like with everything in security, if someone says to you, is that 100% spoof-proof? The answer is no, of course it is, right? Because like anything in security, you take a really smart person, you lock them in a room, you give them unlimited time, resources, they will find a way to beat that explicit biometric authentication. So what we've done at Veridium is we've actually created a behavioural capability, which is based on machine learning techniques. And what it basically does is it looks at the way you hold your phone when you perform a biometric authentication. So the way you hold it, so we look at things like accelerometer and gyroscope. We also monitor things like screen taps and interaction in the application. And then over time that builds up a picture of what becomes normal for you. So then what that all boils down to is if you are an attacker and say, they're trying to gain access to a system as Dave, when Dave is enrolled using Veridium's technology, they need to do three things. So they need to get your phone, because like I say, the phone is the possession factor, so we need that first of all, and that's pretty difficult to do, right? You know if that was missing. Second thing they would need to do is spoof his biometrics, which is actually very difficult, but let's just say they got past that. Then the third thing they need to do is mimic his behaviour. As I say, the interaction with the phone, the way the device is held when you perform the biometric authentication, but then the other things that you can see up there also date, time, location, and other bits and pieces. And then in reality, an attacker would need to do that within 3 or 5 authentication attempts before you would probably lock that device out anyway, get to the point where that authenticator is, you can't use it anymore. So our positioning behind the behavioural capability that we have is that we are protecting the most important but also the most vulnerable thing in security, right? Which is the authenticator, the thing that you use to identify yourself. So now what I would like to do, or what I would like to do, is show you a demonstration of our technology. So just wait for the screen to readjust. So on the right hand side, you should be able to see my smartphone. I'll just resize that window. Okay. So on the smartphones, this is an iPhone 11, so it's got Face ID and some other bits and pieces built into it. But you can see I've got the Veridium Authenticator app installed. So this is what I downloaded from iTunes, and there's an Android app, as I said, from Google Play, and all of this is available in an SDK form. So if you want to embed this in your own mobile applications for your customers, then you can do that as well. Now within the Veridium Authenticator app, I've already gone through the enrollment process, and I won't cover that in this session, but again, if you want to come and discuss it afterwards, I'm more than happy to take you through it. And you can see on my mobile device, I've got a series of biometric authenticators. Okay, so I can use 4F, which is our fingerprint recognition capability. I've also got Veridium's own facial recognition tech as well. But then because this is an iPhone 11, I can also use the inbuilt Face ID as well. And you as an organisation can choose or can offer biometrics there based on preference. So for example, if you only wanted to use native or you wanted to remove native and only use Veridium biometrics, then there's policies in place that allow you to do that. So on the left-hand side, or this side of my screen, you can see that I'm showing the old world, right? So this is what you've all seen 1,000 times, right? So I'm trying to sign into, Citrix. I mean, it's a bit unfair just to pigeonhole Citrix with that. I mean, most technologies, when you're signing in, you would perform multiple factors, so username, password, and then potentially a token as well. But what at Veridium we can do is we can transform that user experience. And then we've got a couple of different logon flows, and that's what I'm going to take you through today. So you see this is actually our example of push notification based logon to Citrix storefront. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to enter my username, and then that is going to send a push notification to my phone. So it responds to the push, it's challenging me for Apple Face ID, and then you'll see without challenging me for passwords, tokens, or anything else, I've been seamlessly signed in to Citrix Storefront. And then from Citrix Storefront, I can go ahead and launch my virtual desktop, and at that point, the passwordless single sign-on is achieved by the Citrix Federated Authentication Service. But then, as I said before, if you've got a bunch of thin clients that exist in your offices, and your users have logged on in the morning through Storefront, they've locked their workstation, like I'm going to do just now. What happens by default is the user, when they go Control-Alt-Delete, they see that screen. But if you've gone passwordless, how does the user sign back in again? So what we have at Veridium is we have our own credential provider, so you can deploy this credential provider as part of your base image, and that credential provider can either send a push notification to the mobile device, or it can display a QR code. So this time, using the QR flow, we're going to tap the profile in the mobile app, and that displays the camera. We'll scan the QR code, what to do, my biometric authentication, and then you can see there it says enrolling for certificate, and then it's automatically signed me back into my virtual desktop. And that was using integration with the Federated Authentication Service, and that is a unique for Veridium. There's no one out there today that achieves that workflow using FAS. That same credential provider can also be used on native or fit client Windows as well. So if you've got Windows desktops, Windows laptops, you can also use that same credential provider. Admittedly, in that scenario, there's no FAS because it's not a virtual desktop, but we have our own components that provide interaction with your certificate authority to obtain that certificate to achieve the single sign-on. But let's go beyond Windows logon for a second. So, we know more and more line of business applications are moving to the cloud. So how do you provide that same familiar authentication experience for those types of applications as well? So just to give you a look and feel for this, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to access Salesforce, and then Salesforce through Authentication Federation using SAML can basically delegate authentication to Veridium ID. So this comes to the Veridium ID server. Tap on that profile again, scan the QR code, do my biometric authentication, and then I benefit from that passwordless sign-in to Salesforce. Now, what some people might say is actually that's not a fantastic user experience because I've already logged in once to my virtual desktop. Why do I now need to authenticate again to access another app? Now, for apps like Salesforce, you might want to have that step-up authentication because they contain sensitive customer data. But let's just take another application as an example, and this time I'm going to access Citrix ShareFile. So when I go to Citrix ShareFile log on screen, again I'm going to opt for the biometric authentication flow. But you'll notice this time there is no biometric challenge. So what we've done is I've set some policies on the server side to say, depending on the network subnet that you're accessing that application from, you don't need to authenticate again, and we actually use Kerberos pass-through to achieve the sign-in to that application. But similarly, if I then open, so if I just close out of this, so I closed out of my virtual desktop, and then now, let's just say I left the office, I've gone home, now working from my MacBook at home. If I now go to the same, if I go to the same web page, I see the same kind of log-on experience again. So I trigger sign in, but this time I will actually get a challenge to perform biometric authentication because obviously my MacBook's on a different network subnet, so authentication is required again. Now the other thing that I mentioned during my demonstration is the importance to pass information from that mobile device into applications. And actually we've got a really nice integration in the Citrix world using Smart Access. And there's a customer I'll talk about later on where they had a requirement where they had to, for regulatory reasons, they had to prove, they had to get evidence that they'd identified where that user was when they logged on, so they could create like a contextual logon experience and limit access to certain applications. So let me show you how this works. So what I'm going to do is this time I'm going to connect to NetScaler. So I'm going to do that as cache. Okay, so I'm going to connect to NetScaler. NetScaler does a SAML redirect to Veridium ID server. And then this time, using my smartphone, scan the QR code, do my biometric authentication, and then I'll be automatically signed into Storefront by NetScaler and I can access all of my applications. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat the process. So I'm going to go into my application settings. So I can find Veridium ID here. And then you see the location's been enabled for the duration of that. So now what I'm going to do is turn location off. And then I'm going to repeat that process again. Log off, redirects me back to NetScaler, perform a biometric authentication. And then this time, because I've got a smart access policy that says if the SAML response doesn't contain a GPS location, what I'm now going to do is I'm going to restrict access to your applications on your desktop. But to be absolutely clear, that's not using IP-based location, which is obviously very easy to spoof. It's using the GPS from the smartphone. And there's a bunch of capability that we have to prevent spoof of the location too. So, now I talked a little bit about what happens if you don't trust the native biometric authenticator, your Touch ID, your Face ID, or just for a specific application you want to provide a step up of. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign in to Citrix Workspace. So when I sign in to Citrix Workspace, I'm going to use a slightly different flow this time, so I'm going to go back to the push flow. What you'll see now is it'll send a push notification to my phone, but you remember my app preferences at the start had our 4F technology disabled. So now you'll see the camera opens, I can present my fingertips, and then I'll do a 4F based authentication using the smartphone to sign me into Citrix Workspace. Workspace just being an example, those policies could apply to any application that you had out there, but the point is we're driving step-up authentication for devices that have the native biometrics, and then also giving you a biometric authenticator for devices that don't have that natively. And then from here, you can see I'm automatically signed into Citrix Workspace, and then through the integration with CloudFaz, as it's called, we still get that same passwordless log on and unlock experience, even when the application is not necessarily rendered through a storefront that's sitting on premises. And you can see the sign. So the last thing I want to show you today is I talked about the challenge with biometrics being around spoofability, that third challenge, okay, and that behavioural capability that we've got. So what we've done is we've rustled up a demonstration. The way we're going to do this is, and just to reiterate, the point here is about protecting the sanctity of the biometric match. So the biometric match is a success, but because of the way you interact with the phone, the way you use the device is different, we should get a negative result. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trigger the logon process, and I'm going to authenticate as me, and I've got a different application for this. So I'm going to do the authentication, and what's going to happen now is it's going to send a push notification back to the phone. So you can see the Veridium in motion, sorry, on the right hand side it said that was a positive match, that was consistent with my behaviour. So now what I'm going to do, Dave, if I could borrow you for a second. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get Dave to repeat the process. So he's going to hold the phone, but he's going to, when it asks for biometric authentication, he'll hold it to my face, and the demo has been with us, that should produce a negative result. So
if anyone can make a demo not work.
Yeah. So I can click Dave. That doesn't work. So yeah, yeah.
It's locked.
Yeah. Great. Okay. And then I do that. So Dave's holding the phone, but it's my biometric. And then what you can see is it's actually a negative result in that scenario. Right. So again, it's about the biometric match being spoofed. Someone managed to do that. Don't know how, it's very, very difficult, but they've managed to do it. But because of the way that you hold your phone is fundamentally different, the way you interact with the application, we deem that to be a negative auth. And much like the location, you can opt what you want to do with that. So it might not always be that when the behaviour fails, the user is immediately, revoked access. You may want to take that application and do a bit like we did with smart access and geolocation, right? You could use that behavioural score to decide which applications are displayed to the user. So just because behaviour fails, it's not always about locking the user out or outright denying access. It's just about giving you the power to create a more contextual user experience based on the application that they're trying to access. So then to come back to here. So what we want to talk about, I've actually mentioned some of this already, but I wanted to talk about a customer that we've deployed well into the tens of thousands of users. And the customer had a number of challenges. So first of all, they had a regulatory requirement in the US where all users had to be MFA enforced. And what that meant was in Active Directory, they took away the password. So at no point in any part of the process could the password exist, but they had to prove that it was multi-factor. So as you've heard, possession of the phone and the biometric authentication, you met that need. They also had a desire to extend the Citrix estate for remote access in Switzerland. So they had a legacy laptop estate that was quite costly for them to manage. They were thinking about refreshing, but what they wanted to do was give that capability, to deliver, use Netscaler for remote access, so they didn't need to hand out those laptops. The challenge though was when they were authenticating, they weren't happy with the IP-based location-aware capability that was sufficient enough to decide where that user was. So the use case was if you were a user based in Switzerland, bound by Swiss banking regulation, and you got on a plane and you flew to the US, By default, you would be able to access your Swiss desktop with your Swiss customer data in the US, which means you would be in breach of that banking regulation. So that was another challenge. They also had a lot of disparate authentication methods. So globally, depending on where you went around the world in this organisation, you would authenticate in a slightly different way. So, in some countries they might use username and password, some would use smart cards, some would use tokens. There's a very inconsistent user experience and costly to manage for all the other reasons that we mentioned before. So fundamentally, the solution from our side was to use the mobile device to pass the GPS location during the authentication result. Also, they had a requirement where they had some users who couldn't use a smartphone, so they were basically on a trade-in floor. So they needed to have technology that would allow them to authenticate password-free, but without having the smartphone. So what we were actually able to do with Veridium's technology was use other peripherals. So, for example, if the laptop has got a webcam, we can use that for facial recognition. We also support external fingerprint scanners. And the other thing that we can also do, they had a legacy hard token estate. So what we were actually able to do was, using our integration that we had with FAS, was deliver that passwordless sign-on experience. But instead of using the phone and the biometrics as an authenticator, actually use an external OTP. So they're able to reuse the hardware that they already had, but still deliver a passwordless logon experience. So with that, I will hand back to Dave.
Cool. So we've shown you how we can completely change that user experience using something people feel exceptionally comfortable with in terms of that mobile device, and how we're stepping up the authentication and the security levels by utilising a much more robust authentication challenge. So as we think about, well, what's that mean for you as an organisation? What should you do? What are the next steps? Well, firstly, it's kind of evaluate what you've got. How many access scenarios are there in place within your organisation? Where would the quick wins be? Where are the problems? If you have an outsourced help desk service, how much are you spending on that password reset type function? What's that cost avoidance that you could bring into the business and utilise that investment into something that's going to drive the organisation forwards? So, and when you've got that picture of kind of what you've got, what it looks like, where are the quick wins? What's the biggest point of value for you as an organisation? And then secondly, well, how can you reduce the number of times an organisation can be the user is going to be challenged to enter their password? So that every time there's a prompt for a password, then that's a potential point of attack for anybody within the organisation. And we've seen the way that Citrix can start including more and more application types behind that intelligent workspace. And we think that's a really good strategy to reduce that kind of attack vector. And then thirdly, and this is a really important one, it's as you're building out your workspace strategy and you're looking at your digital transformation projects, do not miss this opportunity to bring security with you on that journey. Now, this is a great way for you to kind of combine the capabilities that Citrix can deliver, or that you as kind of digital transformation or desktop agents are going to be able to put into practice, but doing it in a more robust, user-friendly way. So we're going to be outside on the stand. If you've got questions, you want to see further instances of the demonstration, we're able to kind of step you through that process. So thank you for the time, and look forward to seeing you throughout the day. Thank you very much.